and it seems like we're going to make it through another day, although the snow is coming down. So we'll proceed with our program. I am so grateful to be able to welcome our panelists, our presenters today from Ghana to Brooklyn, W.E.B. Du Bois and the Reverend Howard Melish. I will, without further ado, welcome my colleague, Father Craig Townsend, forward, who's going to introduce the program to you. Please welcome him.
Thank you. Thank you, Canon John. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all who are tuning in online. I am Craig Townsend. I'm the Associate for Faith Formation here at St. Anne and the Holy Trinity, and I'm delighted to get this panel off and running. This is a follow-up to a panel from a year ago. If you were not there and have not seen it, it's available on the St. Anne and the Holy Trinity Church's YouTube channel. So you can go back and look at that as well. I'm going to go first and say a little bit about the work that we've been doing here, a team of volunteers and I doing some research, and I'll explain all of that. I'll be followed by Philip Luc Saint-Hilaire, PhD, and Phil is, he's professor of history at the College of Biblical Studies in Houston, but more directly to what we're doing here today, he has the great title of being the Senior Research Fellow at the W.E.B. Du Bois Center at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and I'm delighted to have Phil back with us today. And we'll conclude with Japhet Ariuku, who is the Executive Director of the W.E.B. Du Bois Museum Foundation. Full biographies are available in the program, and you can read them at your leisure, and everyone will say a little more about themselves, I'm sure. So I'm going to try to be as quick as I can in providing some background as to what it is we're up to here and why we're talking about W.E.B. Du Bois in this setting, okay? So if we could go to the next slide, Amelia, thank you. So this is the title of a piece, a 19-page narrative that William Howard Melish wrote entitled Du Bois, Nkrumah, and Ghana. He presented it to the Sigma Chi Clergy Reading Group in New York City in 1964, and it is kind of the thing that got all of this going, is that William Howard Melish preached the funeral sermon for W.E.B. Du Bois in Ghana in 1963, and that's just a weird thing. A white Episcopal clergyman from this parish traveling to Ghana to preach Du Bois's funeral sermon, and we want to know why. And so we've done a lot of digging, and I'm going to say a little bit about that, okay? So next slide. So this is the Reverend William Howard Melish, and I had the great good fortune of getting to know him in the last years of his life, because I worked here at this church from 84 to 87, and so I overlapped with him because he served on the altar with us every Sunday until he died. And that was a great gift. You need to know who he is. Most people know who he is. A lot of people don't. So very quickly, here's what the story is. This building is actually Holy Trinity Church. St. Anne's Church is the striped brick building down Clinton Street that was sold to Packer Collegiate Institute, and that congregation moved into this building, reopening it after it had sat empty for at least 10 years. Why did it sit empty? That's the question. William Howard's father, John Howard Melish, was the rector of this church from 1904 until he was thrown out in 1949 because he'd hired in 1939 his son, William Howard, to be the assistant. And William Howard engaged in all sorts of controversial activities. Here's the thing. The center of William Howard's faith was world peace. He believed that peace was absolutely the essential Christian goal, and world peace in the aftermath of 2 world wars really became the key to him. So he was not a communist. He was never a member of the Communist Party. He was called the commie priest, but he was not. He was actually a socialist by enthusiasm, but he also was an admirer of the effort of the Soviet Union to create a new kind of society, and he understood it. He referred to it often as the Great Experiment, to try a different version. One of his major beliefs was that capitalism is a competitive system that actually creates inequality and therefore is a barrier to world peace. And maybe socialism and communism would be more compassionate systems that would contribute to world peace instead. And that's really all it came down to, okay? But during the Second World War in 1941, a group of government and business people got together and they formed something called Russian War Relief, where they raised funds to purchase supplies to send over to Russian civilians during the war. And it was just a straightforward support effort, right, for somebody who was an ally at the time. In 1943, again, still during the war, Russian War Relief essentially got incorporated into something called the National Council of American-Soviet Friendship. And William Howard was one of the founding members of that council and actually served on its board, was its president for a while, was chairman of the board for many years. And all of that seems good. He's interested in how the Soviet Union and the United States, looking to a post-war world, are going to be able to cooperate over peace rather than be in constant conflict. That went fine until 1947, when the National Council for American-Soviet Friendship was put on the Attorney General's subversive list when the McCarthy era got going. And suddenly, William Howard goes from somebody who is seen as supporting a widespread effort toward, a peaceful post-World War II world to somebody who is persecuted, vilified, known as the commie priest, and the battle ensues here in this parish to get him out. And they go to his father and try to get his father to throw him out. They go to William Howard, try to get him to resign so that they won't throw out his father. Both of them refuse that, and eventually the bishop gets involved. And in 1949, against the wishes of the vast majority of the congregation, the bishop supports the vestry and severs the relationship with John Howard Melish, the rector, leaving, however, William Howard in charge. He's now the priest in charge of this place and is so for the next 7 years during ongoing court battles. In 1956, they lose the last battle. In 1957, the bishop closes this church. And in 1961, he has Holy Trinity disbanded as a parish officially by the diocesan convention. And William Howard begins working at some point post-57 for something called the Southern Conference Education Fund. And that's a whole different story. But that's the kind of quick background about who is this guy. It's that period that we're looking at, okay? If I could have the next slide, please. So how do he and Du Bois get connected? So here you can see an exchange of letters that we found in the archives that I'm going to say generously we, meaning Phil, found in the archives at UMass. An exchange of letters in which William Howard is writing about an annual fundraising event for the National Council of American-Soviet Friendship that is held at Madison Square Garden. I mean, big mobs, and we have a copy of a cable he sent to President Truman asking if Truman was going to come and speak at this rally, or would he send a representative as he had the year before, who was a guy named Dean Acheson, which might be a name you've heard. But William Howard writes to Du Bois and says, would you be willing to give me a statement of support for our work, because we think that would really enhance our reputation? So basically, it's a cold call, is what it looks like to us, right? And Du Bois writes back, my dear Mr. Melish, I am enclosing a short statement in accordance with your letter of November 14th. Very sincerely yours, W.E.B. Du Bois. So Du Bois says, sure, because Du Bois, too, is a fan of the Great Experiment. He is actually a member of the Communist Party and is actually sort of on board with this idea, right? So he says, sure, and he sends a letter of support. What we don't have is a copy of the statement of support, but we have this where he says it's happening. Next slide, please, Amelia. This is 1946. In 1947, the reverse occurs. Du Bois writes to William Howard, and he says the NAACP has a statement that they want to present to the United Nations about the denial of rights to citizens of color in this country. And so far, we're getting nowhere with it. Do you think, Mr. Melish, that the Russian delegation might be interested in getting this to move forward in some fashion? And so Melish writes him back and says, yeah, I definitely think you should put it in front of the Russian delegation, and if you send me a copy, I'll try to do what I can. And Du Bois writes back, my dear Mr. Melish, I thank you for your letter. I'm writing the Soviet delegation. Very sincerely yours, etc. So again, two people who know of each other but don't really seem to know each other, but know each other's interests, reaching out to each other for support. Next slide, please, Amelia. Thank you. So then again, the next year, 1948, we have an invitation from William Howard to Du Bois saying, we're having a dinner for the new Russian ambassador. We'd love it if you'd come and be a guest of honor. And Du Bois's assistant writes back and says, I know that he appreciates the invitation to attend the dinner, but he's traveling in the West Coast and isn't going to be here, so thank you, but no. All right, so I just wanted to show this kind of building sense that we get from these letters of a relationship of mutual admiration at the minimum, okay? Next slide, please, Amelia. In 1951, Du Bois marries Shirley Graham Du Bois, and they buy a house here in Brooklyn Heights at someplace. What's the address again, Phil? Oh yeah, 31 Grace Court. We may have mentioned this last year a few times. At 31 Grace Court, just a few blocks from here. And John Howard Melish, the rector, the father and rector of this place, is at his summer home up on Lake George, but he sends a letter, Dear Dr. Du Bois, may I give you a most cordial welcome to Brooklyn Heights, et cetera, et cetera. As soon as I return to the city, I'd love to meet with you, right? So reaching out the hand of welcome, right? Now what we know, next slide please, what we know from William Howard's narrative, that narrative that I showed you the headline from, he writes about how my wife and I first really came to know Dr. Du Bois when he married the brilliant novelist Shirley Graham and for their new home bought from the playwright Arthur Miller a house on Brooklyn Heights' most select street, Grace Court. So it was Arthur Miller's house, right? This was in 1951, during the interim period in the long struggle at Holy Trinity, which followed my father's removal. The congregation rallied around us and supported me as acting minister. We had learned through the grapevine that there was bitter hostility in the community with regard to Arthur Miller's sale of his house to a Negro couple. And the fact that Dr. Du Bois had been indicted and tried on a charge of being the agent of a foreign power because of his leadership in the successful circulation of the Stockholm Peace Appeal scarcely endeared him to the conservative element on Brooklyn Heights. To welcome the newlyweds and ease their community acceptance, we had a reception for them at the rectory, to which some 70 or 80 prominent Heights people were willing to come, and I made a little speech in which I told them something of the contribution both Dr. Du Bois and Mrs. Du Bois had made to American life and letters, and how the federal courts had acquitted him for his work in the honorable cause of peace. So this mutual admiration now has resulted in a kind of welcome, an effort to support and bring them into the community, right? Which seems really pretty impressive for the time, okay? Now, let's go to the next slide. We're going to back up a little bit, back to 1947. This is a sermon that William Howard preached on February 9th in 1947. He references that Lincoln's birthday is coming up, and he titles it Interracial Harmony, in which he argues that racial harmony and world peace are intertwined. This is 1947. A white Episcopal priest here in Brooklyn Heights arguing that interracial harmony and world peace are intertwined. And in this sermon, he concludes this sermon with this striking image, which we find later, years later in that narrative about going to Ghana. We find that as a senior at Harvard, he had read a biography of James Aggrey, who is a Ghanaian educator who founded Achimota College in Accra, Ghana, and chose, he says, as his coat of arms, and he's telling this at the end of this sermon, chose as his coat of arms an image of an octave of piano keys, white and black together, as an image of interracial harmony. And so William Howard takes that image, closes this sermon, interracial harmony, with that image, which is just so striking and powerful to me because, 15, 16 years later, he is preaching Du Bois's funeral sermon at Achimota College in Ghana and seeing the actual coat of arms that James Agri had designed. And that conjunction, that kind of closing of a circle really is powerful to me. But what I'm trying to point to here is what to me is a remarkable understanding of the importance of racial justice to world peace, how they are connected and intertwined, and therefore a connection with Du Bois, again, on that sort of philosophical level, okay? Amelia, the next slide, please. So one of the things that happens, and Phil is going to say much more about this, but Du Bois, along with Carter Woodson, had started Negro History Week 100 years ago now, right, in 1926, an observance that really was only celebrated in black churches, black schools, black cultural institutions, right? But Du Bois and William Howard are becoming buddies, and William Howard and this congregation start holding an annual Negro History Week celebration beginning here in 1952. And this is an article in the local Brooklyn Eagle about that celebration, the first celebration being offered. And they hold one every year until 58 is the last one, and then the church is closed. So, and here you can see, right there, the article says, the observance is partly in honor of Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, who recently became a resident of Brooklyn Heights. So this isn't just about William Howard either. It's about how this entire congregation has really become engaged, involved in the connection between racial harmony, racial justice, and world peace. And in the midst of the McCarthy era and this fight that's going on over their priest, their minister in charge, all right? Next slide, please, Amelia. And this is just a poster for the second annual Negro History Week celebration. You can see they're featuring the first performance of Freedom Train, a musical story by Earl Robinson and Langston Hughes. And I had to look up who Earl Robinson is, and he's the guy who wrote Joe Hill and used to sing, bring his guitar and sing here for teenagers with Pete Seeger. So just right, just amazing. Next slide, please. I wanted to interject this because, along with all this Soviet-American friendship, there are all these organizations that William Howard is either part of or is part of founding. And here, the Episcopal League for Social Action, you can see the address is 157 Montague Street, right, is founded right here. And this is a look back in January, looking back at what happened in 1954, what the accomplishments, and he says, as we have often ventured to point out, the three basic principles of our league, world peace, civil rights, and social change, are indivisible. One cannot be attained without the others. So he is full on in this direction, and he's gathering people, this congregation and the wider denomination, into these taking on these issues. Okay, next slide, please. And so then, and we're gonna, this you'll see more in a minute, but 1955 Negro History Week celebrating Du Bois's birthday, and he actually came here and spoke. So that's him in the parish hall, and we'll have more of that. Next slide, please. Now, what's happening on this from this relationship on the other end? From Du Bois's autobiography, published in 1968, written mostly, according to what I found, around 61, he says, William Howard Melish is one of the few Christian clergymen for whom I have the highest respect. Honest and conscientious, believing sincerely in much of the Christian dogma, which I reject, he is working honestly and without hypocrisy for the guidance of the young, for the uplift of the poor and ignorant, and for the betterment of his city and his country. So we can see that the mutual admiration is really becoming more personal. And one thing that we've discovered is, outside of those letters that we found in the UMass archive, what we've got here are 40 boxes of William Howard's papers, and we have copies of every letter he wrote, and there are no letters more letters back and forth between Melish and Du Bois. But we do have a letter in which he explains that to somebody else and says, we didn't correspond because we either talked by phone, ran into each other in the neighborhood, or saw each other at board meetings of all these organizations that they were on together. So that's why we're grabbing at all these little indications of how this relationship is developing. Next slide, please, Amelia. Thank you. So in 61, right, the Du Boises moved to Ghana, and we'll hear much more about that. But that's why we're here today, right? Brooklyn to Ghana. They moved from 31 Grace Court to Accra. And on August 27th, Du Bois dies in Ghana, and his death is announced at the March on Washington, the famous March on Washington, Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream speech, etc. There's a moment of silence, and they announce the death of W.E.B. Du Bois. And William Howard and his wife, Mary Jane Melish, are, of course, at the March on Washington to hear this announcement, because they're like the Zelig of the mid-20th century, as far as I can tell. They were at everything and knew everyone. So, and there's an account in the paper about the state funeral that happens pretty quickly, etc. And then we come across this letter. Dear Dad, right? And, first it's confusion, but the phone rings, and it's Jessica Smith, who was an openly communist editor of the New World Review, a communist journal, calling him. Have you heard the news? He doesn't know what she's talking about. Jessica, realizing that I was ignorant, proceeded to explain that she had received a cable from Shirley Graham Du Bois, which said that Dr. Du Bois had left a sealed last will and testament, apparently written and sealed here in Brooklyn, when they lived here in Brooklyn, because Shirley seems not to have known what the contents were. The government of Ghana had given him a state funeral, buried his remains near the presidential palace. In the sealed document was a request that as soon as convenient after his death, there should be held a memorial gathering at which, if he were physically able to do so, Paul Robeson should sing spirituals, and if he were unable to be present, Nadine Brewer of the Metropolitan Opera should be invited to take his place, and the Reverend William Howard Melish to speak. And there it is. Dear Dad, I'm going to Ghana to preach Du Bois's funeral, right? And it's just wild to me, the sort of vividness of this guy, this white priest here, is flying to Ghana to preach this funeral, and he himself is caught by surprise. He has no idea this is happening. Next slide, please, Amelia. You'll see a better version of this slide in the next talk, because I stole this from Phil, but I couldn't do the cool thing that he did with the airplane, so you'll see that. But just to give a picture of, flying from New York to Accra, Ghana, but really the flight, you actually land, first you land in Dakar to refuel, and then to land in Liberia to let some people off, and then to Accra. And all the 7.5-hour flight to Dakar, to the first landing, Dakar, Senegal, William Howard says, is barely enough time for cocktails, a leisurely dinner, a doze, and then waking 2 hours later when the sun came up to some orange juice, and getting off the plane for a stretch, in which it's so hot that you got to take your tie and jacket off, because that's just how you flew in those days. So, okay, next slide, please, Amelia. So this is the first page of the funeral, the published version of William Howard's funeral sermon. He chooses to use opening a passage from Walt Whitman's Song of the Open Road about the great companions, and just does this wonderful thing where he develops this image throughout of how W.E.B. Du Bois is one of the great companions. And there are copies of this in archives, as Phil says, all over the place. We got a box of them downstairs. They're everywhere. And as Phil points out, there are you can actually hear an audio version of it online, because they did tape it. Okay, so, but this is the thing. Here's the sermon memorial service at the Agri Memorial Church, Achimota College, Accra, Ghana, right? This person that he had read about as a college student, admired, used the imagery in a sermon in 1947, and now he's in that very place doing this sermon. Next slide, please, Amelia. After the sermon, after the funeral service, there's a state dinner, and we actually have this invitation in the files here, which just was great to come across, an embossed invitation from Osagyefo the president. That is Kwame Nkrumah, right? The first black African president of a sub-Saharan independent country in the 20th century, right? An extraordinary figure in the history of decolonialization. He really was a remarkable person. He went by the title Osagyefo, which was just a Ghanaian term for leader. But William Howard was invited to this state dinner where he sat next to Kwame Nkrumah, the president. And in the narrative that I've referred to, he says, William Howard says, the conversation about sitting next to Nkrumah, the conversation naturally circled around our mutual feelings for Dr. Du Bois. And since I was to him, to Nkrumah, an unknown guest, I told him a little of the things that I thought had led the doctor to have some interest in and attachment to me. And I just love coming across that line because that's what we're trying to do in our research here, is figure out what are the things that led to interest in and attachment to William Howard. And it's pulling these little snippets out because he says that, but he doesn't say anything about what he actually says to Nkrumah that those things might be. So we're still trying to tease them out. But what happens as a result of this is he develops a relationship with Nkrumah where he comes home and he writes this narrative and he reads it to this group of clergy. He refers to it in letters for years. This is one of the most powerful and important things he has done in his life, right? Next slide, please, Amelia. And so the following February, he writes a letter to Kwame Nkrumah, right? Dear Mr. President, right? He writes the day after there was a memorial for Du Bois at Carnegie Hall, organized by Ossie Davis and others, at which William Howard gave the benediction, right? And he says, I promised that I would try to send you a copy of my sermon, and here it is. I've enclosed it because now it's been published. I've never forgotten and can never forget your kindnesses to me as one whom Dr. Du Bois considered a trusted friend. May I send you my warm personal regards and not be considered impertinent if I sign this letter affectionately, William Howard Melish. I just love that line, right? Not be considered impertinent if I sign this letter. And he gets a response back from the personal secretary to Nkrumah who says, Osagyefo, the president of Ghana, has asked me to thank you very much for your kind letter of the 24th February for sending him a copy of the address you gave. Glad to have this. Sends his kindest regards and best wishes. Next, Amelia, thank you. A year later, on the second anniversary of Du Bois's death, on August 27th, William Howard writes to Nkrumah again. And as you can see, it's a much longer letter. William Howard has just, in the past year, gone for the first time to the Soviet Union. All these years of being vilified, persecuted, supported, whatever, in his efforts to create world peace by establishing friendship between the US and Soviet Union, and he'd never actually gone, and he finally gets to go. And one of the people he wants to tell this to is Kwame Nkrumah, which is just so striking to me. And he says, in one of the last paragraphs here, the freedom movement and the peace movement in the United States are two powerful streams that lie parallel and must find some common focus. To speed this development, there is much to be done. He sees himself and Nkrumah as carrying on in the same battle, and the same battle that was Du Bois's battle. Why did he preach this funeral sermon? Because, I don't know, it's like a mind meld or something. he and Du Bois saw the same large movements in history that needed to be made and risked everything, both separately and together, to try to make them happen. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon. It is wonderful to be with you and to be back for a second year in a row. Before I begin, I want to thank Canon John for his support of my work. I want to recognize my collaborator and comrade, Father Craig Townsend. I'd also like to thank the Historical Society of the Episcopal Church for their ongoing support of my research now for 2 years in a row. And finally, I want to give a shout out to my colleagues at the W.E.B. Du Bois Center at UMass Amherst. Last year in our program, I talked about the Du Bois' Black history in Brooklyn specifically. I introduced the peace work that they carried out with colleagues and comrades in Brooklyn Heights and really across the world. And specifically, I talked about the Du Bois' connection, that is to say, Shirley Graham Du Bois and Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. I talked about their connection with and friendship with the communist scholar and leader Herbert Aptaker, who Du Bois handpicked in 1946 to edit his papers and his manuscripts. I talked about Du Bois' connection with Herbert and his family, his wife Faye, and their daughter Bettina. This year, I want to tell some more stories about the Du Bois' Black history in Brooklyn, but take that story international or transnational into Ghana. So we will see some of the same characters in the story, but also other New Yorkers and other Brooklynites in that larger narrative. And in the next slide, we see William Howard Melish once again, and Craig has beautifully done some historical table setting for us to contextualize the friendship between Du Bois and Melish, but I want to add a couple of things to that and note a number of remarkable commemorations and anniversaries. Craig has mentioned the centennial of Negro History Week / Black History Month this year. It is, of course, the 40th anniversary also of the Reverend William Howard Melish's passing, so I wanted to mention that as well. Craig mentioned Du Bois's superlative praise for Reverend Melish. Shirley Graham Du Bois, in her writings, also praised the work of Melish and talked about the interracial composition of the congregation here and how that was a draw to both of them to visit Holy Trinity. Not to mention the commitment to social justice and social change that pervaded this particular congregation. And the cover of William Howard Melish's address on the right hand of this slide, Shirley described Melish's sermon as a, quote, brilliant and warm speech. And so as we delve further into the details of Negro History Week here at Holy Trinity in the 1950s, the next slide introduces us to the 1955 program. And so I'll be talking about the 1955 event and also the 1958 event. The 1955 event was of such importance that in the church bulletin, there's a 2-page photo spread printed of this event. The centerpiece being Du Bois's address with a map of Africa in the background. This was a special request Du Bois made to have for his talk, to have some visuals along with the unfolding narrative. His address in 1955 was titled Africa and Afro-Americans. And in this speech, Du Bois gave a sweeping history of the continent of Africa from ancient times to the present. He talked about indigenous African economies. As he unfolded the history of the continent, he also talked about European imperial incursion into Africa and the extractive, exploitative measures that made modern history. He singled out South Africa for particular derision for its racist practice of apartheid. At the same time, he pointed to the Gold Coast, later Ghana, as well as Nigeria as nations on the forefront of the African liberation movements. And it would be 2 years after this speech that we see Ghanaian independence, 5 years after this presentation, when Nigeria achieved its independence. In the speech, Du Bois also talked about his work in New York City in the 1950s with the Council on African Affairs. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And he said the history that he unfolded in 1955 merited significant attention. Its history is long and intricate, Du Bois wrote, but it is real and near. So as we go to the next slide to talk about the 1958 program, again, the church bulletin announced this major program. And the bulletin read that the Negro History Week program at this church was, quote, the most exciting public event each year at Holy Trinity. And I understand that's still the case, so I'm glad to be here. The 1958 program was significant for a number of reasons. As Craig pointed out earlier, it was the occasion for Du Bois's 90th birthday. Unlike previous celebrations, there was a second follow-up speaker, a kind of response to Du Bois's comments. And on the next slide, the third significant point, among others, for this program, and this is the official flyer poster made for this event, we see Mary Jane Melish's art. This was a woodcut that she made to honor Du Bois. And you'll remember a couple of slides ago, the photograph of Du Bois at the podium with the map of Africa in the background. Mary Jane Melish, the artist, used that photo as inspiration for this particular woodcut. And as we move to the next slide, before getting to the content of the 1958 program, I want to talk about the second speaker that visited Holy Trinity that year and lay out some of the context for the Council on African Affairs. So this photograph is of Alpheus Hunton and his wife, Dorothy. Paul Robeson is in the middle, and of course Du Bois is there on the far left, an appropriate placement given the political situation and scene we've talked about earlier today. These three individuals were comrades, they were friends, they were mutual supporters. They had dinner together, they hung out socially, and they were committed politically to black liberation in the United States and black freedom abroad. These three individuals worked together at the Council on African Affairs, which began in 1937 and shut down in 1955, the result of McCarthyite, anti-black, anti-communist repression. Alpheus Hunton was the executive director of the Council on African Affairs. Paul Robeson was the chair, and Du Bois served as the vice chair. The council had a number of aims and initiatives. It sought to bring attention to American audiences of what was happening in terms of African liberation movements in the mid-20th century. The council also provided material support for African liberation movements, particularly in South Africa and in Nigeria. Alpheus Hunton edited the newsletter and bulletin of the council, which was the vehicle of dissemination for their work. And this photograph from December 1951 was when Alpheus Hunton was released from prison. Because he would not give the United States government a list of donors for the Council on African Affairs, he was jailed for 9 months of the year 1951. He lost, his passport was confiscated. That very same year, Du Bois was indicted by the federal government in February, and he spent the balance of that calendar year, he and Shirley, traveling around raising money for legal fees. Remarkably, stunningly, he was acquitted in late 1951, really a few weeks before this photograph was taken. And so we see these three friends, these three comrades in support of one another. Paul Robeson also had his passport confiscated for the 1950s. So these three towering black intellectuals, black leaders, suffered under an anti-communist quarantine for this particular decade, but they fought on and they carried out their work devoted to liberation. There's another connection to make with this photograph. I'm not certain that Eslanda Robeson was the person who took this particular picture, but if she was, it's a congruent part of this story because she and William Howard Melish worked together in the Episcopal League for Social Action, and Eslanda Robeson was the keynote speaker at Holy Trinity's Negro History Week celebration in 1953. So you can see these networks of activists and intellectuals and writers and scholars circulating in this larger story. So we see with the next slide some of the content of the program from 1958. 300 people attended and crowded the gym behind us, as the church bulletin said. And in his 90th birthday address, Du Bois made a call to action, and he talked about the importance of collective efforts to pursue economic and political equality via socialism, which we heard about earlier. In the next slide, we see the two main speakers of the 1958 event. Alpheus Hunton's response to Du Bois's talk reflected, quote, respect, esteem, and affection for Dr. Du Bois. Hunton went on to praise Du Bois's, quote, clear-sighted leadership, and he emphasized Du Bois's scholarship and activism, which sought to make connections between the civil rights movement in the United States and the black liberation struggles on the continent. As I mentioned previously, Du Bois and many others had his passport confiscated in 1951. He received it in 1958, and he and Shirley set about on a world tour. They traveled to Europe, they traveled to Asia, and their work continued through 1960. And it was this year that the Du Boises and Nkrumah met in Ghana. They had, Kwame Nkrumah hosted a state dinner for them there. And in February of 1961, as we see on the next slide, Kwame Nkrumah sent a telegram to Brooklyn. That's right, he sent a telegram to 31 Grace Court, informing the Du Boises that the Ghana Academy of Science had not only pledged its support for a program called the Encyclopedia Africana, but it also pledged financial support as well. Now, the Encyclopedia Africana project was slated to be a multi-volume reference work on the history and culture of Africa. Kwame Nkrumah invited Du Bois to head up this project and really launch it. And the idea was that African scholars and African intellectuals would write the reference entries so that the Encyclopedia Africana would reflect an African viewpoint on African history and culture, not a European or European American or Western version of African history. And this remained the vision of the project over the years. And so by late 1961, plans were put in place, plans made for the Du Boises to relocate to Ghana. Du Bois was 93 years old. Shirley was in her mid-60s. So this was no small thing to move internationally, to move transatlantically at this time. And so Du Bois's friends got together and they threw the couple a going-away party. And there's an image, as we see in the next slide. It's a great picture of Du Bois and his comrade and friend Herbert Aptaker at the airport, sharing a laugh, sharing a memory, making a memory of their time together. And so it was on Thursday, October 5th, 1961, as the next slide shows, that the Du Boises jetted off across the Atlantic. Now, this slide does not reflect their travel route directly. They traveled to London on a Boeing 707, the Pan Am flight. They spent a few days in London meeting with friends and getting prepared to fly to Ghana on a Ghana Airways airplane, where they eventually relocated. And in 1962, as the next slide shows, they moved into their home provided by Kwame Nkrumah, the bungalow, as it is affectionately known. And so Du Bois carried out his work at this particular period. And one of the things that Shirley writes about is that every afternoon after work, Du Bois loved to take a car ride in a Russian Cheka that was a gift of the USSR. Earlier, I talked about the connection between Alpheus Hunton and W.E.B. Du Bois. Well, that connection, as the next slide reveals, continued in Ghana. Du Bois invited Alpheus Hunton to assist him with the effort of the Encyclopedia Africana, and when Du Bois got sick in 1962, Alpheus Hunton assumed responsibilities for the secretariat of the project. And Hunton was active across Africa, including the participation in a Du Bois Memorial March upon his death. And on the far right of that picture, that is Maya Angelou holding a sign on which it reads W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, we've talked about connections between Brooklyn and Ghana. We've talked about connections between Du Bois and Hunton and Robeson and others. I want to spend the last few minutes of my presentation focusing specifically on the bungalow. And so the next slide has a photograph of Herbert Aptaker, again, another Brooklyn and Ghana connection. And Herbert Aptaker and his wife Faye traveled to Accra in the fall of 1964. Because of the anti-communist quarantine, Herbert Aptaker could not get his passport renewed, and so he could not travel to Ghana to attend the memorial service of his dear friend and comrade. But in the Supreme Court decision, Aptaker versus Secretary of State, the decision handed down in April of 1964, this revocation of passports for communists was overturned. And so very quickly, Herbert Aptaker and his wife booked a flight and eventually made their way to Ghana. Faye Aptaker was a travel agent, and so she had the latest and greatest technology in terms of photography, and so as a result, their trip to Ghana was very well documented visually. And so I placed this photograph of Herbert Aptaker in front of the bungalow next to a photograph of what the bungalow looks like today. This is a photograph I took in September of 2025 when I traveled to Ghana, working with Japhet on a commemorative ceremony with Du Bois, and I was able to do some research as well. And so part of my presentation today is bringing you research directly from Accra to Brooklyn. One of the things, or several of the things that Aptaker mentioned in his correspondence with Shirley in anticipation of their trip, he wanted to visit Du Bois's original burial site, and he wanted to see where Shirley worked, which I'll get to in a minute. And as the next slide shows, Herbert Aptaker and his wife Faye did indeed get to visit the original burial site. This photograph is stunning in several different ways. It is a color photograph when much of the photography of the period, or at least the historical records in photography of the period, is in black and white. Du Bois was buried outside of Osu or Christiansborg Castle, literally on the coast. To Aptaker's left, about 100 yards, is the Atlantic Ocean. And we see Shirley there facing the headstone, having placed freshly cut flowers there. We see Faye's hand resting gently on Herbert's shoulder, and Herbert is kneeling down. He had not seen his comrade Du Bois since 1961, and it's as if by kneeling down, he wants to be close to his comrade, his friend, his mentor, and it's a very moving picture in that regard. After the Aptakers and Shirley visited Osu Castle, they went to, as the next slide shows, the headquarters of Ghana TV, where Shirley directed the programming and where Shirley would move into in the following year. And Herbert called this building most impressive in later correspondence. To make another connection to New York and Brooklyn, on this very trip, the Aptakers had dinner with, as Aptaker put it, Alpheus and Dorothy. And so they reconnected with their old friends from New York City. Now, the next slide is, it contains some more photographs from the Aptakers' visit to the bungalow. So in 1964, you see the bungalow, and to the bungalow's left is a canopy for rest and relaxation. Things changed 20 years later, as the next slide demonstrates, where the Ghanaian government officially named the bungalow and now the mausoleum a historic government site. The Ghanaian government and U.S. comrades such as David Graham Du Bois, Shirley Graham Du Bois' son, Dr. Du Bois' adopted stepson, launched the W.E.B. Du Bois Memorial Center for Pan-African Culture, celebrating another anniversary this year with its opening in, its inauguration in '85, its opening in 1986. So the bungalow then becomes a museum and a site of study and scholarship, which, as the next slide shows, remains there today. And I have to thank my colleague from Ghana, Israel Koromoa, for taking this photograph just a few weeks ago. So I'm bringing you up to the minute details here. And about this site, we'll hear a lot more from Japhet. So what do you say we go inside the bungalow, as the next slide shows? When I was there in September, I took a photograph where I tried to capture the places inside where Du Bois and Shirley worked. That's on the far left, Du Bois's library. Again, this kind of orientation on the left, and Shirley Graham Du Bois's office, side by side. And in the final slide, there is an image of Du Bois's library. When the Du Boises moved to Ghana, they deposited some of Du Bois's archives in Brooklyn with Herbert Aptaker. They sent some of the archives to Nashville to be deposited at Fisk University, but they took a significant portion of Du Bois's library and archives to Ghana with them. Around 1,500 books and manuscript material, and this library, these books from Brooklyn, formed the material essence of Du Bois's intellect, and in some ways a portion of the intellectual foundation of the Encyclopedia Africana project. As somebody deeply interested in archives, Herbert Aptaker, when he saw this library, when he saw Du Bois's library when he entered the bungalow, he said in a letter, "There is much work for me here on the Du Bois papers and the larger Du Bois papers project that he was pursuing." In conclusion, Brooklyn's Black history is both a U.S. and a global story. The Du Boises, the Melishes, the Huntons, and the Aptakers, among many others, brought the Black world to Brooklyn and took Brooklyn to West Africa. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is extraordinary presentation. My name is Jafet Ayuku. I'm a Ghanaian by birth. I live here in New York. I live in Harlem. I've been here for the past 55 years. I came here as a young man to get a degree, go back home, and P.S. Broadway swallowed me. I swallowed Broadway, and I've been here since. But along the way, I used to work at J.P. Morgan Chase, and I'm a banker by profession. I was in the accounting department at J.P. Morgan Chase. I retired at the end of 2001 after the 9/11 disaster. My office was about 5 blocks away from the World Trade Centers, so I saw the 2 buildings come down. It was such a traumatic event for me. So at the end of 2001, I decided to call it in. So I retired, young man, but I had children in college, so I had to do something else. So I got involved in some few things, and along the way, I met Jeffrey Sachs, the developmental economist. We became friends, and we started doing some work in Ghana, implementing the Millennium Development Goals by building Millennium Development villages and cities. So with that, I got to meet a lot of the Ghanaian political leadership. I became friends with former president that passed away, John Atta Mills. I got to know the then vice president, who is now the president of Ghana, John Mahama, and a few other people. So in my work as well, I got to meet with Kwame Appiah. I got to meet with Henry Louis Gates. These are known Du Bois scholars, as well as a gentleman at Yale by the name of Michael Moran. So they asked me, said, Jafet, when was the last time you went to the Du Bois Center in Accra? I said, quite frankly, I don't remember the last time I went there. This was way back when I was in high school. And so I just came to say, well, try and go there and see what's happening at the center. So on one of my trips to Ghana, I think it was 2015 or so, I went to visit the center, and indeed, I was shocked to see what was happening with Du Bois's collection. I went to the bungalow, you look up on the ceiling, and it was leaking, evidence of leaks. You look at the books, and the books are just falling apart, filled with insects and filled with dust and all of that. Wow. And then I went to the tomb, and the carpet just dirty. The whole place just didn't look right. And I said to myself, wow, this is the greatest African-American intellectual of all times. And he lies in Ghana, and Ghana doesn't know what to do with his mortal remains. The rest of the world has little pieces of Du Bois. They got, MS has some papers of him, Harvard, you name it. Ghana has the mortal remains of W.E.B. Du Bois and the ashes of Shirley Graham Du Bois, and they don't know what to do with it. So, interestingly though, I shared this story with people. I say, well, I met Du Bois when I was 14 years old. They went, really? Well, this is how I met Du Bois. In my high school days, we went to a school library period. So at the library, I went through the shelves, and just out of nowhere, the first book that I picked out of all the books was a red rectangular book, and the title was Souls of Black Folk. Wow. A 14-year-old African boy, don't speak English at home, how am I going to read Souls of Black Folk? And I flipped through it, and I flipped through it. And within that 45-minute period, though, I think in the second chapter, The Dawn of Freedom, the first paragraph, for some strange reason, I was able to memorize the first paragraph of that second chapter. The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line, the relation of the darker and the lighter races of men in Asia, in Africa, in Americas, and the islands of the seas. I memorized that in that 45-minute library period. I don't know how that happened. So I became a Du Bois scholar on campus. So you can imagine, every time I see my friends gathered, they are probably the 20th century, oh, Japhet, you're going to kill us. So anyway, so I go into the grave, into the tomb, and I'm standing there behind him, and this thing came to me. This thing that I learned 64 years ago came back to me all of a sudden. The power of the 20th century, I said, oh my God, I think there got to be something here. Maybe the good Lord was preparing me for this job that I'm taking on to myself. And then as I stood behind him, I love literature. So another verse came to my head, which is that, but yesterday, the word of Du Bois might have stood against the world. Now lies him here, and none so poor to do him reverence. Julius Caesar. I just substituted Caesar with Du Bois. And I said to myself, there is something here that I need to take on. So I decided I'm going to pursue to find out what we could do to honor Du Bois in Ghana. So the Du Bois place is owned by the Ghana government. They own it for the past several years. As you saw in the presentation, when he died in 1963, he was buried at in the walls of the castle in 85, 86. He was moved to to where we are now, which I'm going to talk about. And so the government has been running the place. It's a big place. And unfortunately, all they do is to rent the campus for events, parties, weddings, and funerals. So if you ask any average Ghanaian on the street, have you been to the Du Bois Center before? Yeah, I was there. What did you go there to do? Oh, I went there for a party, either a wedding or, they have no idea who lies at the Du Bois Center. So I said, this thing got to change. So I met with the then board of the Du Bois Center, and I said, I have a group of people in the U.S. who want to do something to honor Du Bois here. They said, well, Japhet, we know what to do, just that we don't have the money. If you could raise the money and give it to us, we will know what to do. I said, really? You want me to raise the money, give it to you, and you know what to do? Okay. So then I said, I tell you what, why don't you guys give me a list of priorities of things that you like to do if you had the money? I left, came back to the States, I'm waiting. After about a month or so, I got a list of things that they would like to do if they had the money. The first item on that long list was to build a bungalow for the director of the center. A bungalow for the director of the center. So I said, I didn't go down the list. I saw the bungalow, I didn't go down the rest of the list. I called up. I said, by the way, why do you need a bungalow for the director of the center? They said, oh, he works late. I said, oh, yeah? He works late doing what? He works late supervising parties. I lost it. He works late supervising parties at the center. Not that he works late hosting people coming to visit Du Bois or coming to do research, but he works late hosting parties at the center. I said, yeah, no, this is not going to work. So I had to convince the Ghana government that we have formed a foundation called the W.E.B. Du Bois Museum Foundation, and that we are capable of running and managing this place and make it into a world-class memorial for Du Bois and Shelley, and that they should give the ownership, not the ownership, but the responsibility for the operation and management of the center to us. We will raise the money. We will develop the place. We will manage it. We will employ people in Ghana. Nobody's coming from America to manage the place. It's all going to be Ghanaians. Ladies and gentlemen, it has taken me more than 11 years to convince the Ghana government that this is the right thing to do. 11 years. I started with Muhammad in 2016. We're working on it. And he said, okay, Jafet, it sounds like a good idea, but 2016 was an election year. So he said, well, why don't you wait until after the election in 2017, and then we can sign the agreement. I said, okay. I said, Mr. President, you guys are going to win the elections. We're going to win. Okay. December 8th. The election is on December 7th. So December 8th, I'm frantically calling Ghana to find out what is the result. They lost the election. My goodness. So I had to start all over again. Now, in Ghana, I know that the only person that can say yes to this thing that we're trying to do is the presidency. Nobody else can say yes to what the agreement to turn over the property to us to manage. Not even to own, not even to lease, just to manage it and develop it. It's only the presidency can do that. So I had to find a way to work myself into the good graces of the new president, Nana Addo. I didn't know him. I had no idea who he was, whatever. But every time he came to New York, I'll go to whatever event that he has, and then I always put on my Kente shawl. So I sort of stand out every time I go to event. So it got to a point where I think he recognizes me. So one event at Harvard in 2019, March of 2019, I went there and there was an intimate dinner. So I walked over and he sort of motioned to me. And I went to him, Mr. President, good to see you. He said, what's your name? I'm Jafet. I said, I'd like to talk to you about something. He said, well, talk to my secretary. When you come to Ghana, come and visit with me. So that was in March of 2019. So in May of 2019, I went to visit with him. And I said, Mr. President, this is the idea that we have, that the Bois Center is falling apart. It's just a shameful thing that Ghana has the mortal remains of the Bois and we don't know what to do with it. It's okay. Good idea. Talk to my minister for tourism, which is the ministry that manages the place. So I engaged the minister in 2019. We started a conversation into 2020. 2020 was an election year. You know where I'm going with this. The minister with whom we had signed an MOU, and we're in the process of signing the final agreement, she lost her seat in Parliament and therefore lost her portfolio as the Minister for Tourism. So we have to start all over again with a new minister. And then COVID broke. So everything just sort of suspended. So we kept on fighting, we kept on fighting, we kept on fighting. In 2023, we finally signed an agreement with the Ghana government, giving us the right to redevelop the place, manage it for a period of 50 years, broken into 25. And so 25 for the first time, and then we all get together. If we're happy with our relationship, we sign on again for another 25 years. So, okay, we're going to go ahead with that. The architect for the project is a very famous Ghanaian by the name of David Ajay. Very famous. He contributed to the design of the African American Museum of History and Culture in Washington, D.C. So there was no brainer, and a Ghanaian as well, there was no brainer bringing him on board as our architect. We went through all kinds of designs with him. We paid about $3.5 million. $3.5 million we paid him to put the architecture together for us. July 4th, 2023, I'm in a hospital bed, and a friend of mine sent me a Financial Times article, a huge expose about David Ajay forcing himself on 3 of his female single mother employees. Oh my God. He admitted, but he said it was consensual. 3 women working for him, he forces himself on them. He's married. You are the boss, and he says it was consensual. How is that possible? In the meantime, we started getting calls and emails, Mellon Foundation, Library of Congress. They said, Jafet, we don't want you guys to spend a penny of our funding on David Adjaye's services. Oh my God. So sometimes I go to Du Bois's grave and I say, oh my, do you really want us to do this thing for you? Ladies and gentlemen, if I go and I say, oh my, are you sure? Maybe he wants a simple life. He doesn't want anything extraordinary, Just leave me the way I am. Maybe, I don't know. But it's been a tough road. But I would never give up. I never gave up. Never gave up. So I kept on fighting. So we said we have to change architectures. So we brought in a new architect who's going to charge us all kinds of money. But in truth, though, what David Adjaye gave us was just too limited. It wasn't all that great because we couldn't argue with him and all of that. This new architect is just fabulous. That what you see, is just, you like it. Just beautiful rendition of what would befit the memory of Dr. Du Bois. So all is done, and then there's an election in 2024. A new government comes to power in 2025. In January, they call me, they say, Jafet, we have to take a look at the agreement that you signed with the previous government. We don't trust them. Really? Okay, how long is it going to take you guys to look at the agreement? Maybe 3 months. Okay, I am waiting. 3 months, 4 months, a whole year, ladies and gentlemen. It wasn't until this past December 4th that the cabinet of the new President Mahama, whom I know very well, I know his wife very well, I know all of them, but he says that let the process take its course. The cabinet finally approved the agreement that we have signed with the previous government with a couple of changes. That's what they did, just a couple of changes. So we believe we are on a road to rebuild, we believe we are on a road to rebuild the Du Bois Center to fit the legacy of Dr. Du Bois. Please, the next. So anyway, just before we turn that, in 1940, I don't know, Du Bois had this, I don't know where he said this, but he said, I believe the country of Africa to bury me and my bones. He didn't know he was going to die in Ghana. I don't know how he came up with that, but he has a way of making statement which is going to come true. So, next slide, please. So, you all know his history. I don't have to go through that with you. He went to Ghana. What you see there was in February when, on his birthday, he was honored by the University of Ghana with an academic degree, PhD from University of Ghana, Legon. Next one, please. And this is the letter that the exchange with Kwame Nkrumah invited him to come to Ghana to head the Secretariat for the Encyclopedia Africana. Now, actually, Dr. Du Bois, he went to Liberia first, and then the second country that he visited was in Nigeria, 1960, on their Independence Day. And then from Nigeria, in I think it was October, November, he went to Ghana, had a small conversation with Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah just prevailed upon him to come. He said, you are the only one that can really lead the effort to write this Encyclopedia Africana. And I think Du Bois also, once upon a time, wanted to write the Encyclopedia of the Negro. So that sort of fit in very well with what he had always dreamed to do. So next one, please. So these are some of the pictures that we have in our shop in Ghana, where it shows some of the parties and some of the things that Du Bois did when he was in Ghana. Next, please. Again, some more pictures of his interactions with people that he was in Ghana with. Bembella on the far end is Bembella of Algeria, who came with the delegation, came and visited with him. He's, I think, the last African president besides Kwame Nkrumah to see him before he died. Next one. You saw the picture of the car. These are some pictures. This is the last dinner that he had with Kwame Nkrumah on his birthday in February, again, before he passed away. And we put together the various countries, as best as we can, the various countries that Du Bois visited. We did it purposely because we are going to be raising money, tons of money that we're going to be raising. So we wanted to identify all the countries that Du Bois visited, and hopefully we'll go to all the embassies, have a conversation with them, and see if we can get some support from their citizens all over the world. So, next one. Again, this is our goal. The goal for the Du Bois Center is to transform the W.E.B. Du Bois Memorial Center into a world-class museum, library, and Pan-African cultural complex that honors history, advances scholarship, and aspires global dialogue. Next, please. Now, if you go into the Du Bois, what they have there as the museum, it displays some of the academic regalia that he brought to Ghana. If you touch them, they all fall apart. Over the years, I mean, they are in very bad condition. We are going to restore. We're going to conserve all of. We are talking to people here in the U.S. who have the expertise to restore all of these things here. The book, some of the books that you see there, they are in very, very bad shape. Phil, you were there, you saw them. Actually, when I started working on this project, the first thing I did was to come up with an album of how the books look like. And every time anybody saw the picture, said, wow, no, you got to do something about this, we got to do something about this. So we have, as part of our major plan, to preserve and to conserve all the books that are in very bad shape. I had an agreement with the Library of Congress, and as we speak, 2 of our employees are in Washington studying under the tutelage of expertise at Library of Congress that they're going to go back and teach our Ghanaian staff on how to preserve and to conserve these books here. So we're very excited about that. Next, please. So this is the new architecture that we have in mind. It's going to be a wonderful, wonderful complex. I mean, and I'm going to invite all of you to come for dedication in 2029, somewhere there. All of you are going to come. Next, please. So at the core, we are going to have a visitor orientation. This is something called Akwaba Pavilion. Now, the word Obaken, so we have to be careful in Ghana. Accra, where Du Bois is, the language that they speak is Ga. Akwaba is a more predominant language of the Ashantis and the Akans. Okay? So originally we had Akwaba Pavilion. And then the Gas brought it to our attention. Wait a minute, Du Bois is here. You are using Akwaba? You should be using the Ga welcome word. And I'm a Ga, by the way. So the Gas, the welcome is Obaken. So we say Obaken, which is a welcome, Akwaba, which is the same welcome, and then the English welcome. Next, please. All right, so this is a nice view of the complex. So we're going to have a library and a museum joined together, and then in the middle, we're going to have some stuff in there. It's just going to be wonderful. I'm telling you, I can't wait for this thing to start. So let's go on to the next one. This is the tomb, the new memorial that we're building to house the remains of Du Bois and Shelley Graham. We are not going to move his body from where it is now. We're just going to build around it. And the ashes of Shelley is currently in a box sitting next to the grave. We are going to build a grave for her and put the ashes in the grave next to him. I checked with the current executor of Du Bois's estate, a gentleman by the name of Odell Murray, and he says, yep, it's fine for us to go ahead and do that. So we are going to build a separate grave for Shelley in the new tomb. Next one, please. Now, this is the scholars' residence that we want to put up. We envision that we're going to have scholars that will come from all over the world to come and do research and study Du Bois's works and all of that. So we are planning to build a 50-room unit that will house scholars and visitors who will come and do research on the campus, and hopefully we'll publish some more books and papers. Next, please. Now, of course, this is a picture of the signing of the agreement with the new government, which we hope will rapidly implement before another government comes to it. it has been a difficult project, but we think we'll succeed. So anyway, this is the picture of the sign of the new agreement. It's all good. It's all good. We are very happy about that. And I think that's it, right? Or is there more? Yeah. So the major funders so far, we have the Bank of America, board members, Daniel Rose, and then for foundation, the Library of Congress, McCarthy Foundation, and the Mellon Foundation. Mellon Foundation is our biggest donor so far. They're giving us about $5 million. They're saying that they might increase it depending upon how well we do with the funding they're giving us. So we're very excited about that. And I think that's it. But I do have a video that we can show of the. If you can play the video of what is to come, so that we can all. And the cost, construction is like $60 million. In total, we're looking to raise $200 million. But the key thing is we're looking for $60 million that will get us going on the brick and mortar that we need to do. And check, no, we think we can do it. We're not just looking at the U.S., we're looking at globally. I mean, Du Bois was a global figure. So we're looking at China, we're looking at Japan, and we're looking at the African continent itself. I mean, there are millionaires and billionaires on the African continent, and we're going to go after all of them. The Dangotes of the world, we're going to go after all of them for them to contribute something to this effort. So we think we can do it. So our contact, my COO and CFO, and then the head of operations in Ghana. And we have a QR code that when you scan, you can get all of the information, all of the design and the architecture. Yep, so we can do the movie. Okay. Yeah, it's a very short video. Yeah. It might be that we need to turn the sound up. Does it have sound? Yeah, it does. Okay. Yeah. Why don't you pause it for a minute, Amelia? It does. Where is that? Oh, let me see. No, that's your phone. Do you have the? Okay. Back here. Oh yeah. I don't know. Let's see if that does it.
Locate. Located in Cantonment, Accra. The W.E.B. Du Bois Museum and Library Complex, the project of the W.E.B. Du Bois Museum Foundation. We begin at the main entrance, a clean, modern gateway. The main entrance and the Aquaba Center, accented with Adinkra-inspired designs. A covered walkway leads visitors into the Aquaba Center. At the heart of the complex stands the combined museum and library. Across the compound, landscaped gardens, fountains, and the central statue create a calm and elegant foreground as the building comes into view. Its facade is lined with striking Adinkra-inspired panels. The building's contemporary entrance blends elegant design with Pan-African elements. At the center of the complex is the mausoleum, the final resting place of Dr. Du Bois and Shirley Graham Du Bois. The campus then opens into a vibrant public zone featuring a 360-seat amphitheater and a modern restaurant, creating spaces where culture, scholarship, and community life connect. A walk into the amphitheater reveals a warm, open-air space. The Marcus Garvey Scholars Residence, a 50-room facility for visiting academics. The W.E.B. Du Bois Museum and Library Complex is more than architecture. It is a living tribute to a global legacy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We've all been here as long as we were promised, but if there are any burning questions, this is the moment. Anyone? Or burning being the operative word, which we'd all like to feel a little bit more like we are, because it's cold in here. Anything? Anyone? Okay, why don't you guys come up so we can thank you all again. You've given a lot to us today. These guys, big round of applause. Thank you. All right. Oh, please tell folks.
Yeah, so I brought some calendars and some brochures that you guys can pick up on the project. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I think the front door is open, and you can also go through the parish hall. And stay warm and safe.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing. God bless you. Those people in that video didn't seem to like each other very much. I hope there's more